So thank you for coming. I also want to say that I'm donating all of my personal proceeds from this book to Indian Victims of Charity. So, um, no, please don't. Sorry. Please, when you read their literature, the thing that becomes really apparent is just how gruesome the organization is. And I mean, as a scholar, it became very apparent that the only reason anyone would buy this book is because they kill Indians, right? So for me, ethically and morally, it didn't make sense for me to profit from it. And plus, I have a day job, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about a part of Lushkar that people don't generally discuss. So my colleagues have written about the organization. There's a lot of books out there about the kinds of terrorist attacks. There's histories of the book, histories of the organization, but no one has really looked at the domestic politics of the organization. And so that's what I do in this book. And my primary source is actually their literature. So this is an organization that has its in-house publishing outfit. It makes a lot of money actually from its publications. And then after I got PNG'd from Pakistan, because I can't go back, they hated my Pak Army book. I was very distressed about how I was going to complete this project. And then I discovered that the American Library of Congress actually buys their books. So then I just did interlibrary loan, and voila, they came to my house without having to get harassed in Pakistan. So the other thing, I think the thing that really leapt out at me as I began reading their materials is really two aspects. Is that they're the only organization in Pakistan that has never attacked Pakistan, right? So all of the other militant groups that have targeted Afghanistan and India, except Lashkar, have targeted the Pakistanis as well. And not only does Lashkar-e-Taiba not target Pakistanis, they are militantly opposed to, say, ISIS because they don't accept this doctrine of takfir, of declaring someone to be a kafir and then subsequently liable to be killed. So from the Pakistani state's point of view, Lashkar is very important because it is a very reliable proxy in terms of operating in India as well as in Afghanistan. But domestically, it spreads a very clear message of nonviolence. Believe it or not, they don't even advocate violence against Hindus in Sindh, right? So what they do instead is that they have this enormous social outreach infrastructure. And because the state does not provide services to Hindus in Sindh, they will go into Sindh and they will build wells, they'll provide medical and other social services. And in this way, they are trying to convert Hindus, right? So domestically, this organization is viciously and vigorously pro-state. They oppose any kind of opposition to the government. So, but they have a problem, right? And their essential problem is very few Pakistanis ascribe to their creed. In fact, maybe fewer than 5% ascribe to their particular ideological variant of Islam. So this is where other aspects of the domestic politics of the organization come into play. So out of 100 people that they train for militant operations, maybe just a handful will eventually get to India and be killed. So what happens to the rest of these recruits? Well, what they do is they go back to their village, they go back to their district, and they proselytize on behalf of Lashkar. And one of the most important dimensions is that the Lashkar looks at the entire family as an instrument of, or as an object of recruitment. And so long before I went to Georgetown, I worked for I call it the Rund Corporation because it's just that terrible. Sorry, oh shoot, there are children in the room. I'm really sorry about that. So I used to do a lot of work on military recruitment. And in full disclosure, both of my brothers are in the Army. So I've got infantry all around me, and they recruit. And it became really apparent to me that there's much more similarities in how this Lashkar operates to, say, a conventional military organization than most of us would like to believe. So in my country, we recruit young men and women at the age of 16. And that is because once they graduate from high school, they've got better things to do, and it's not so easy to get them into boots. So because they're 16, we have to get the permission of both parents. And if you talk to military recruiters, they will tell you, dad doesn't care, dad isn't even engaged, he's probably having a really crappy beer, watching really crappy Fox News. It's the mother that you have to persuade. And we have many commercials dedicated to getting the mother to approve of their son or daughter's decision to join the military. So Lusker does the same thing. They spend a lot of effort recruiting these families. They prefer, and some will say they won't allow someone to even go on a mission without their mother's blessing. And they also spend a lot of effort to make sure that that mother, in fact, does give her blessing. And they also have a very well-organized women's wing. They have female propagandists, and they write a variety of magazines and books that are specifically targeting women. And so I would say, I don't have my own children, but my brothers, they fought in Iraq. And when you read some of the things that these women say, it's a very disconcerting. So if you think about what are the reasons for their encouraging their sons to join the jihad, one of the first and foremost reasons that they offer is that they want to have the status of a shaheed's mother. Right? This is a very high status thing for a mother to be. And they don't really make a distinction between a mother of a shaheed from someone who died in Lashkar versus someone who died in the army. Right? A mother of a shaheed is a mother of a shaheed. And through countless biographies that these mothers have written of their sons, the mothers will say, I told my son, do not come back a Ghazi. In other words, do not come back a veteran. Take a bullet on your chest, which is an expression that they use frequently. I want to be a mother of a shaheed. Now, from an American point of view, and I would probably say an Indian point of view, can you imagine a mother saying, don't come back alive, I want to be a gold star mom? Right? It's really quite remarkable that a mother would say this. And so it raises questions about whether or not these women actually did say this at the time, whether it's an ex post facto rationalization, or whether this is just propaganda. In other words, they're lying, but it's still useful because this is what is depicted is an ideal mother. And the Lashkar talks about the mother being the literal reproducer of the Ummah in the sense that she's giving birth to the Ummah, but also in encouraging their children to be a proper member of the Ummah. So this whole issue of status is really quite interesting. But even more disturbing than the issue of status is this notion that the sons, when they attain martyrdom, they get to intercede on behalf of a number of family members. And this is also where the mothers are quite strange, so I think, to most non-terrorist mothers. The mothers will say, I want my son to die in an operation so that he can bring me to heaven. Now, if you actually are a believer in any religious tradition, it's usually pretty clear how you go to heaven. You don't need to tell your son to go kill and get killed to go to heaven, right? Most religions make it fairly obvious how you get there, especially the ones that have a heaven. The ones that don't, that's a little bit more complicated. But what you immediately see is that how this notion of intercession is one of the ways in which the organization continues to proselytize. So what he's not yet a shaheed, but he's gonna be, and especially if someone else is writing his biography for him, like his commander or a battle buddy, they will say to the women in particular, but not just women, they'll also say it to their brothers, you guys are not living like proper Muslims. And they'll specifically call out particular family members for doing certain things. And they'll say, when I get to heaven, I'm going to intercede on your behalf. So don't embarrass me when you get there, right? And they'll say this, and they'll give you very specific directions that you should be doing to live your life as a proper Muslim. It won't surprise you that women are told that they should veil a certain way. Boys are told, stop doing pundi. I don't know how you translate pundi. It's a very good Punjabi word. It's anywhere between Eve teasing and more inappropriate behavior with females. So this is one aspect that not only are they talking about what are the attributes of a good jihadi, they're also talking about what are the attributes of a good jihadi family. And the women, again, what I found is there's this disproportionate focus in the countering violent extremism work and literature that focuses on men of military age. But when you look at how this organization works, what you really see, they're recruiting a family and they're recruiting a community. So if you're only looking at the men of military age, you're actually missing a large part of the puzzle. So when the boys die, it again, very similar to a conventional military organization, it is not just any chump that knocks on your door to tell you that your son has died, right? It is usually a high-level commander. We even have biographies where Hafiz Saeed himself was involved in delivering the message. We even have, by the way, biographies where Hafiz Saeed himself picked a young man to go on a message. So I keep telling my friends in the FBI, you keep saying you want evidence. I got a whole pile of it. I'll give it to you for free. I don't even need the reward. I just want to see the dude, disappeared in a drone strike. I don't know. You guys may or may not appreciate drone humor as much as I do. But when you study these groups, you're just like, just put me in the drone command room for about 38 hours. I think I can fix this problem. It basically hit the corps commanders and the ISI headquarters, and the problem might go away. So when they knock on the door, this is also an opportunity to bring the entire community in. So they will do the Gayabana, the prayer that you do for the deceased person when the corpse is not present, because the corpse is most likely in Indian administered Kashmir. So they will have a very large party, typically in a soccer field or a cricket field, and this is where members of the organization go around and talk about the heroism of the fighter. So they're also using this as an opportunity to gather other recruits, right? After the fellow dies, the LET does not leave the family. The LET continues to make sure that the family is living like a Lashkar-e-Taiba family, that they're not recidivizing back to being a Deobandi or a Barelvi. And so this is also important, going back to what I told you about in the beginning, which is one of the reasons why this organization is so important domestically, is that they are very pro-state and they're anti-violence. So this is one of the ways in which they grow the organization, but also a way in which they keep those that they've already, converted well within the fold. Now, I don't know how much time I have.
You have 5 more minutes, actually 3 more minutes.
We can open
For the Q&A.
we can open up to Q&A now, because there might be more interesting questions, and I'm kind of guessing at what people might want to hear.
Okay, there are going to be lots of questions.
Yes.
Not everybody is going to get to question Christine, but are you willing to take them after the session is over?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So I'm going to take as many as I can, yeah?
Christine, Kojak Wing Commander Butt, war veteran from Lanka. I understand your perspective perfectly. Ideology, finance, or the drugs from Afghanistan. I just want to highlight something on Kashmir. Rights, duties, privileges. In 48, the Kashmiris stood by us. Yeah. Yeah, I want her comments on this. Okay. In 65, they stood with the Indian Army, but in 65. Later on, why did they turn? Because Ziaul Haq joined the Jamaat, radicalized, killed Bhutto. So it was not just, these things. All of them. The only great perspective you've given is about the ladies coming in. So anything else you can join?
So there's a whole book. So I could talk about this organization quite a bit. But I also am going to take exception to your history of events in Pakistan. Actually, it wasn't Zia who began this. It was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. he actually began this jihad nonsense, and he began it in 1973. So I think too many times people associate decisions that Zulfikar Ali Bhutto made with Zia. And so the question of why did Kashmiris turn, I'm not sure that they did. If Kashmiris truly turned, you'd have a bigger problem on your hands, right? So I don't accept the premise of the question. And it really wasn't a question, it was a comment.
I have a question, Christine. I heard that when a Lashkar young man is killed in operation, the family receives a large lump sum. Is that true?
Okay, so this is a great question. The answer is variable. So before I got kicked out of Pakistan, I did a lot of surveys, and one of the first surveys I did was I actually interviewed I didn't do it personally. I had Pakistanis do it, but we identified jihadi families through the wills that the jihadis left. And so we interviewed about 140 of them, and that was one of the questions. What kind of a shaheed payment did you get, from whom and by whom? And this is in 2004, so there were no prohibitions. People would not tell us how many daughters they had in the household, but they told us how much money they got from the ISI and from the organization. And so for high value, families were getting maybe up to 1 lakh rupees. This was in 2004. At the lower end, they might get ED, and maybe the ED would be a one-time affair, maybe it would be recurring. So we did hear that they got money, in some cases directly from the ISI, and in other cases it was from the organization. So the answer is yes. But we also found something kind of interesting. Because of the status, we figured amongst Punjabis, because they do dowry, and because dowry is so expensive, that we hypothesized that they might be getting better marriage alliances, and for daughters having to give less dowry, and for boys getting more dowry. And in several of the families that we interviewed, they did report having better marriage alliances. Now, at the other extreme, others said that they actually got worse marriage alliances for whatever reason. But the short answer is yes, but there's not a consistent payment.
Very brief question. There were 17 strikes one way, is what you said yesterday. How many were there the other way?
Oh, you mean how many? You mean, what do you mean? Like, how many different terrorist attacks have there been? Yeah, you mean about the surgical strikes? No, what I said was there's this idea that there have only been 2 surgical strikes, but Sharad Joshi, who was formerly at RUSI, he calculated prior to the 2 that we know of, one through a movie and one through practically a movie, that there were about 17. It's just that you didn't hear about it, right? Because the government chose to keep it quiet. How many did Pakistan do? I don't know, Shara didn't do that study.
Ma'am, the 2611
Yes.
attack is behind the mastermind is the Lakshadweep. Do they recruit people from other countries like David Hardy? David Hadley was one of those recruits to attack, and also Indian people. They recruit for the team?
Yeah, so David Headley. So a couple of things about David Headley. David Headley was an entrepreneur, right? Because what David Headley wanted to do, he wanted to do what he called the cartoons operation, right? And so he was going around knocking on doors, like Ilyas Kashmiri. That's how he gets wrapped up with Ilyas Kashmiri, is he's looking for support to do the cartoon operation. Lashkar actually double crosses him, right? Because Lashkar says, yes, you do this first, then we will help you with the cartoon operation. But David Headley is also enormously stupid, because if you understand LET, you would know they were never going to help him with the cartoon operation. Because the most important asset that Pakistan gives LET is Pakistan, right? And if LET were to be behind such an attack, it would be very difficult to sustain pressure to let this organization run as freely and wildly, as it does. Going to do they recruit others? So I actually know one of the Americans that were arrested for facilitating. He was charged with they wanted to charge him for aiding and abetting a terrorist organization, but LET had not been prescribed when he was with the organization. So they came up with a really goofy law to prosecute him under. But what I learned from him, and he was a really good example of the so-called American Lushkars, there was a complete misunderstanding. He didn't want to fight in Kashmir. What he actually wanted to do, he was a jihadi from the Balkans. And he came back, and and this happened to my brothers. When he felt that he was serving a purpose defending Bosnian Muslims that he couldn't get in the States. And it was very similar to how my brothers were when they came back from Iraq. They opposed to the war, but they still felt like they were doing something bigger than themselves. So he was chasing his jihad adrenaline. And he was trying to go to Chechnya, and they were not accepting untrained jihadis. And his financier was actually, I believe, from Oman, but his financier had no training. So he took the financier to Pakistan to get him trained. And then the financier got sick and said, this whole jihad thing isn't for me, kind of leaving David Headley in Pakistan. So for all of the fanfare about the discussion of foreign fighters, I can tell you this, based upon a data set that we had compiled of about 900 biographies, 90% of the organization comes from 10 districts in the Punjab. Right. So this is a Punjabi organization. You can't call it a Kashmiri Tanzim. It is very much a Punjabi organization. And also in their literature, they're just very Punjabi references. Like you'll see like echoes of Susi Pono or Hirranja, right? It is just dripping with Punjabis, reflecting who their target is. And also in their literature, you'll see a lot of references to partition, right? The other thing, if you compare the map of the Lushkars with the map that I did of where the Pakistan army is coming from, there's a lot of overlap. And the reason for that is, I think, is they're actually competing for the same attributes, right? Because what we see in our LET fighters that are in our database, and they're the best of the best because they actually died, right? Unlike that duffer, Kassab, who the most important thing for these guys is to die. Because if they get caught, we learn all kinds of things about who's behind them. So they, in terms of like their education and their skill set, they're somewhere between someone who could be an NCO or someone who could qualify for the PMA. But you know from your own budget how much money you spend on retirements and personnel costs. These guys aren't retiring, right? So you get the firepower of a fairly competent soldier at virtually no cost. I mean, it's a rounding error, right, compared to the personnel costs of someone that'll be joining the PMA. It is an incredibly cost-effective way of fighting a war. And also, there will always be plausible deniability, even if that plausibility is becoming less plausible, right? Okay, sure. Okay.
Your quick comments on the reach and the influence of the LET, is it increasing? And how do you see the future of the LET?
All right, so now I have not been able to go back since 2013, right? So, but what I can tell you is that from about 2004 onward, the organization made a very big push into Sindh. And I know this because I was hanging out with Yahya Mujahid, and he was telling us his plans. This is when JUD was being launched. And they got their big start actually from the Asian tsunami. So they made a big relief shipment actually to Sri Lanka. So 2004 was the year when JUD begins launching this massive service operation. Balochistan is a huge area of interest and actions for them. And of course, the reason for this is CPEC. So, what I love about this organization is they publish so much. It's really just low-hanging fruit to grab it and see what they're thinking. So, when they fielded the Milli Muslim League for the last election, they had a manifesto. And their manifesto read just like something out of Army headquarters. And I think you guys know this. One of the reasons why they're such effective fighters is because the Army trained them, right? I mean, they were explicitly trained by the Pak Army. So, and we can also see in the recruitment patterns in our database the districts where they're reaching in Quetta. So the last time I was in Quetta, we were even seeing, and I didn't take pictures of them because I was afraid I would get shot. But you just driving around the bazaar, you would see the Lushkar posters, and they have a very distinctive kind of artwork. It's like anime. You can recognize anime along. I'm nearsighted as can be, sir. I could not identify you when we leave this place. That's how nearsighted I am. But the visual of their art is so familiar, even someone blind like me can spot it. So Balochistan and Sindh, I think, are their big areas of focus. And Hafiz Saeed has said as much.